Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for inviting me here to join you this evening. It's an enormous pleasure to follow, in particular, the speeches of Ellen Milligan and Eva O'Sullivan, who I think presented a really compelling case. And it's also amusing to follow Catherine Hamnett. I suspect this is maybe the only platform where we will have the opportunity to speak together. But I'd like to correct, if I may, 2 points. First of all, Ellen was absolutely right to say that today we don't have aircraft carriers. However, we do have helicopter carriers, and we are today building the 2 largest ships that has ever been built in this country for the Royal Navy. They are both aircraft carriers, and they will have more and better equipped aircraft flying from them from 2018. So looking forward, we will have the ability to project conventional carrier strike to a degree that we've never had before. And secondly, if I may, Catherine, the reason I was rising to try to correct you is that the control mechanism for our strategic deterrent is, as we describe, isolated. This means it is not capable of the kind of assault that you had indicated it might be over the internet, and is absolutely impossible to turn against this country. So I think we have to put that firmly back into its box. Now, why have I come to join you this evening to talk about the case for retaining our strategic deterrent? It's because I have the privilege of being a member of the government, of serving as a minister in the Ministry of Defence, and the primary job of the government of any country, and in particular of this country, is to keep our nation and our citizens safe. And the nuclear deterrent is at the top end of the spectrum of capability that we maintain for our armed forces to use, should they be called upon to do so, to deter the ultimate threat to the existential nature of the potential threat to this country. That's why we have it. And the reason why, in response to the argument from those proposing the motion that this is unnecessary, this will never happen, you have to get real and recognise the world that we live in today. Today, there are around 17,000 nuclear weapons around the earth. Today, we saw only last weekend the Koreans launching a ballistic missile, which they claimed had nothing to do with nuclear weapons. We are absolutely convinced that they are looking to build that capability and able to put them in a position where they could threaten the western coast of the United States and other parts in the region where they live. Today, the Russians are investing in new nuclear-powered submarines to deliver nuclear strategic weapons. They are investing at a similar or more rapid pace than we are, but for a capability which will completely improve their existing capability. This is the world that we live in. And remember, only last month, the Koreans exploded a weapon, an underground weapon, and told the world that this was a hydrogen bomb. We're not sure, but that's what they're trying to persuade us that it is, and to persuade their neighbours in South Korea, for whom many people in this country, many of your grandfathers, uncles, will have lost their lives. This is a very dangerous world. We have just completed our Strategic Defence and Security Review in November, and that identified that we are living in a more dangerous and darker and more volatile world. And this is the reality that those of us who are responsible for keeping this country safe have to recognise. This is not a matter for a protest group to take risks with the national security of this country, in my view. A word on deterrence and what it means. We maintain a strategic nuclear deterrent in order to deter anybody else who might threaten this country, that they would know, any adversary would know that should they seek to attack this country, we would have the ability to strike back to the place where that attack has come from. So that is what deterrent is about. It is showing that those who've got nuclear weapons would lose more if they were to attack this country with nuclear weapons. And the question was raised, has this, I think by Ellen, has this ever been used? Well, the fact of the matter is that our deterrent is in use 24 hours a day and night, every day of the year, every night of the year, and has been for 53 years. There has not been, since the two incidents that Ellen correctly identified, any use of nuclear weapons in the world. There has not been a global conflagration during that time. Those of you, and there are very few in the room I recognise, who were old enough to remember the Cold War, will recognise that we came very close to it during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the very fact of the balance of deterrence between essentially the Soviet Union and the United States and their allies prevented first strike of a nuclear missile during that crisis. So I agree that with one element of the proposition that we should have a world without nuclear weapons. But we've got them. We have to deal with that. So how do we best seek to reduce the risk from nuclear weapons being deployed? The way we do that is through multilateral negotiations between nuclear weapon states and aspiring nuclear weapon states to get them to reduce their stockpiles. And that has worked. In 1991, there were some 12,000 nuclear operational warheads in the United States and the then Soviet Union alone. In 1994, Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev began the process of multilateral nuclear disarmament, which led to that stockpile halving to 6,000 operational warheads by 2009. So multilateral disarmament works. The challenge for those who are arguing in favour of this country getting rid of our nuclear weapons is to point out, how does unilateralism work? What evidence is there that if we were to remove nuclear weapons from this soil, there would be any other impact on any other nation? And I can give you one example of that. This government has been this and the coalition government before it, has been more transparent about the number of warheads, the number of missiles that we have in our possession than any other government anywhere around the world. And this Prime Minister committed to reduce the nuclear warheads in use on our nuclear submarines. And we are in the process of, between the Cold War and 2020, we will have halved the number of weapons that we have as a nation. And since 2010, when we reduced the number of warheads carried on our missiles, can anybody name any other country who has reduced their stockpile at all? There's a Mars bar outside for anybody who can. It hasn't happened. So unilateralism does not work, and that's the proposition that is in front of us this evening. I'm going to make two more points. One, about CASD. Why do we have a continuous at-sea deterrence? We looked at this under the previous government. In 2013, we undertook something called the Alternatives Review, which the Liberal Democrats wanted us to do. We came to the conclusion in that review that the most cost-effective, the most operationally effective way, as a nation which already has a delivery system from submarines, was to continue a delivery system through submarines. And we decided at that point that the right way forward was to follow the advice that had been given to the previous Labour government, where there has historically been a consensus over this issue, and that's why I'm so pleased to see that this debate on our side will be closed by John Woodcock, if I may say so, a very brave Labour Member of Parliament who shares my view and is prepared to share a platform with me, although he may make some other comments. But CASD works as a deterrent. It means that it is the least able method of delivery to be identified where it is. And this nonsense that you're hearing in the newspapers at the moment, I'm afraid to say supported by one of John's frontbench colleagues, that the waters are opaque and submarines will be discovered in the lifetime of this project, are living in la-la land, just to use another colloquial phrase. People have been saying that since the 1950s, that technology does not exist. The technology going into underwater drones at the moment is going into mine clearance in very narrow areas, not seeking for the needle in the haystack across the oceans of the world. It's a nonsense. Secondly, the other point is on cost. Point was made about the significant cost of continuing this programme, and I accept it's a significant cost. We're talking about the cost of replacing the 4 submarines is £31 billion. We did a detailed costing last year which informed the Strategic Defence Review. £31 billion is a lot of money. We're going to spend it over 35 years. Do the maths. The running costs of operating the submarines, 6% of the defence budget, so similar to the current running cost of the existing submarines and the system. That is equivalent to, let's say, I think the figures were mentioned, it's roughly half the cost of what travellers in London spend on their Oyster cards to travel on the tube. And the successor, unlike the tube, doesn't stop at red lights. It operates day and night right the way through the year, so it's much better value than taking the tube.
Points of information.
Just if I...
Information?
I'm happy to take that.
Thank you very much. Taking the figures that you presented, I think, in response to a question from Mr. Crispin Blunt, and taking the figures from the Strategic Defence and Security Review, I think the total for the procurement of the submarines and the lifetime costs comes to something in the region of £183 billion.
We don't recognise those figures.
183 billion.
We don't recognise those figures. We do recognise the figure I've given you of £31 billion, and we, as the cost of the successful submarines, and we recognise the annual running cost of about 6% of the defence budget. That is affordable within the UK government spending, and it's the cost of, if you put that in other terms, most people in this house, in this chamber, live in a house which will be insured by somebody. The insurance cost of this deterrent is 0.2% of government spending. That's a very good premium to be paying to protect this country and our citizens. So I urge you to oppose this motion. Yeah.